Captain Zara Washington froze mid-step, her pilot's cap nearly slipping as silence spread across the terminal. The voices around her, announcements echoing through speakers, the chatter of passengers rushing to catch their flights, seemed to dim in that instant. It wasn't the noise that stunned her. It was the words. The sharp, casual dismissal from a crew member who didn't even glance up. "You'll have to wait outside." For a moment, she thought she misheard. She looked down at herself, her pressed navy blue uniform, the polished shoes, and the silver wings pinned to her chest. She carried the authority of the skies, the responsibility of hundreds of lives, and the pride of years spent climbing through turbulence. Not just in aircraft, but in life itself. Yet here she was, standing on polished airport tiles, being spoken to as though she were an intruder. The sting was not in the words alone, but in their casualness. It was not shouted, not explained, not even coded with false politeness. Just tossed her way, like instructions given to someone whose presence was inconvenient. Passengers nearby glanced up, some with curiosity, others with quiet recognition of what was unfolding. A few exchanged looks, the kind that said, "Yes, we've seen this before." The terminal suddenly felt smaller. Zara's hand instinctively reached for her cap, steadying it. Inside, she felt a surge of questions pressing against her chest. Do they not see me? Do they not see this uniform? Do they not see the years, the sacrifices, the countless hours in simulators, the sleepless nights of study, and the relentless climb to earn these wings? She held her posture. A captain never slouched, never faltered, and never let the turbulence show on her face. Still, her heart pounded. It had been years since Zara first stepped into the aviation academy, one of only 3 black women in a class of more than 100. She remembered the way instructors would glance twice, as if wondering if she was in the right place. She remembered late nights in the dorms, when she'd replay every lesson in her head because failure was not an option. Where others could afford mistakes, hers would always be magnified. Her success wasn't just hers. It was for those who came before and those who would come after. And yet here she stood, uniform pristine, rank undeniable, being told to wait outside. 7 minutes. That was the measure of her dismissal. 7 minutes in which she stood by the glass doors, watching through them as the very crew she was meant to command moved about without her. 7 minutes in which her authority, her dignity, and her identity as a captain were placed on pause. Every second ticked louder than the last. She watched passengers file past, their eyes flicking between her uniform and her position outside. Some whispered. Some shook their heads in quiet disbelief. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked in a voice far too loud, "Mommy, why is the pilot standing out here?" The mother hushed the child, glancing at Zara with a look that mixed sympathy and shame. Zara's breath steadied. She had learnt, over the years, how to hold herself in spaces that tried to shrink her. She thought of her grandmother, who once told her, "Baby, when they close the door on you, you stand so tall outside that they cannot help but open it again." But this was different. This wasn't just a closed door. It was a deliberate attempt to erase her authority in front of everyone. And that, she knew, could not be left unanswered. When the 7 minutes ended, it was not because they invited her back in. It was because Zara decided she would no longer wait. She adjusted her cap, squared her shoulders, and stepped through the doors with the quiet authority of someone who carried the weight of history with her. The crew turned. Conversations halted. Faces shifted from annoyance to confusion to unease. Zara's voice, calm but resonant, filled the space. "I am Captain Zara Washington. This is my flight, and this crew has just made the gravest mistake of their careers." The silence that followed was heavier than the engines of the aircraft, she commanded. But to understand the gravity of this moment, to feel the power in those words, we need to step back into Zara's journey. Because her presence in that terminal was not an accident. It was built on decades of resilience, each chapter written in the ink of determination and sacrifice. Zara grew up under the wide skies of Georgia, where planes often cut across the horizon. As a child, she'd lie in the grass, pointing up at the contrails that stretched like chalk lines across blue. Her friends dreamed of stardom, fame, or fast cars. Zara dreamed of altitude. One day, she would whisper, "I'll be up there." Her family believed in her dreams, though the world did not make it easy. Aviation was expensive. Lessons were scarce. But her father, a mechanic who worked long shifts at a factory, and her mother, a nurse who picked up double shifts, pooled what they could. They knew Zara's dreams were not just hers. They were the family's hope for something bigger. At 16, Zara earned her first taste of flight in a rickety Cessna, the instructor watching closely as she gripped the controls. She remembered the thrill of liftoff, the way the ground fell away, and the horizon opening wider than anything she had ever imagined. She knew then, this was not just a hobby. This was her life's calling. The academy years were ruthless. There were whispered doubts, jokes made too loudly in hallways, and instructors who accidentally overlooked her hand when volunteers were needed. But Zara had learned early on, the best way to silence doubt was with excellence. She graduated near the top of her class, logged thousands of hours, and eventually earned her wings with Skyline Airways, becoming one of the very few black women captains in the company's history. Each step forward felt like breaking through glass ceilings layered on top of one another, which is why the incident in the terminal cut so deep. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every barrier she had broken, every stereotype she had fought, every time she had been told she didn't belong, and proving again and again that she did. So when Zara stood before the crew, announcing herself not with anger, but with clarity, she was carrying not just her own voice, but the echo of countless others. Passengers who overheard began to lean closer, sensing history in the making. Cameras discreetly lifted. The hum of the airport seemed to hold its breath. Zara knew then. This was more than a confrontation. This was a reckoning. The 7 minutes of waiting had been a crucible. In those minutes, Zara had replayed her entire journey. The scholarships she fought for, the rejection she endured, the late nights studying in cramped apartments, the joy of her first solo flight, and the proud tears in her parents' eyes when she pinned on her wings. And then she had thought of this moment, being told to wait outside. The contrast was unbearable. The insult was undeniable. And the response was inevitable. She looked each crew member in the eye, her voice low but unshakable. "You treated me as though I did not belong. You made me wait outside my own command. You have shown me, and every passenger watching, a level of disrespect that cannot be excused." Her words were not shouted, but they carried the weight of finality. "I am relieving you of duty. Effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the terminal. The crew stood frozen, their disbelief mirrored by the passengers who had just witnessed what few ever do. A captain firing her crew on the spot. Zara's face held no anger, only resolve. Her authority was not in question. Her decision was not up for debate. In that moment, she was not just a pilot. She was a symbol, and the world around her knew it. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. "I am relieving you of duty. Effective immediately." For a long moment, no one moved. The crew stood stiff, their eyes darting between one another as though searching for someone to speak, someone to undo what had just been said. But authority in aviation is absolute, and the captain's word is final. There was no undoing this. Passengers gasped softly, whispers rippling like waves through the gate area. Phones that had already been raised now filmed openly, capturing every angle of the moment. A child's voice cut through the silence. "Mommy, the pilot is the boss, right?" The mother nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Zara. One of the flight attendants, a tall man with years of seniority etched into the lines of his face, finally found his voice. "Captain Washington," he began, his tone stiff, This isn't necessary. We were just following procedure." Zara met his gaze steadily. Procedure does not include humiliating your captain in front of passengers and staff. Procedure does not mean stripping authority because of the color of my skin. The words landed heavy. No one could challenge them without revealing what they had hoped would remain unspoken. Another crew member whispered under her breath, "She's serious." "Yes," Zara replied firmly, "I am." She signaled to the operations manager standing nearby, who had been watching with wide eyes, unsure whether to intervene. Arrange replacements, Zara instructed. This crew is relieved of duty. The safety and dignity of this flight demand better. The manager hesitated, caught between disbelief and duty. But the uniform Zara wore, the 4 stripes on her shoulders, and the authority in her voice left no room for argument. He nodded and hurried off. The relieved crew shuffled together, anger simmering on their faces, but none dared to openly defy the decision. They had humiliated her in front of passengers. Now they stood humiliated themselves, cameras capturing their every twitch, every whisper. They filed out silently, leaving behind the space they had once dominated. As the crew disappeared down the terminal, a quiet murmur grew louder. Applause. It began with a few passengers, hesitant at first, clapping softly. Then more joined, until the gate filled with the sound of hands striking together. Not mockery, not politeness, but recognition. They had seen something rare, a black woman in authority, standing tall in the face of disrespect and claiming justice on the spot. Zara did not bow, did not smile, and did not seek validation. She simply nodded once, her face calm. A captain's dignity was not in applause, but in control. Still, the sound warmed something inside her chest, a reminder that what she had done was not only for herself. A journalist among the passengers, already lived tweeting the scene, typed furiously. Unbelievable moment at Skyline Airways gate. The black female captain just fired her entire crew for discrimination. Crowd applauding. History unfolding at the airport. Within minutes, the story began to spread. But as Zara prepared to board the aircraft with a fresh replacement crew, her mind replayed the 7 minutes outside. They weren't just an inconvenience. They had been a crucible, burning away hesitation, leaving only resolve. She thought of her parents again, her father's grease-stained hands fixing broken engines late at night, her mother's tired but proud eyes watching her graduate flight school. She thought of the mentors who whispered, "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." And she thought of every black pilot who had walked into rooms filled with doubt and chosen to stay anyway. When she stepped onto the plane that afternoon, she carried them all with her. The passengers followed, still buzzing with the shock of what they had witnessed. Some approached quietly, thanking her. One older woman with silver hair and tears in her eyes said, "I never thought I'd live to see this day. Thank you for standing tall." Zara simply placed her hand over her heart and nodded. By the time Flight 428 touched down at its destination, the story was already spreading across news outlets. Clips of the confrontation went viral on social media, shared with captions like, "Respect is not optional." She waited outside for 7 minutes. Then she fired them all. This is what leadership looks like. The airline scrambled to contain the story, issuing a vague statement about personnel reassignment due to internal matters. But passengers who had witnessed the event were not silent. Their testimonies poured into the digital world like fuel on a growing fire. One passenger wrote, "I watched Captain Zara Washington stand humiliated for no reason, then claim her dignity back in a way I'll never forget. That wasn't just about flying a plane. That was about flying above injustice." Another posted, "For 7 minutes, she was outside. For the rest of history, she'll be remembered for what she did next." The clips gathered millions of views in hours. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Captain Washington, hashtag 7 minutes, hashtag fired for justice. But beyond the applause and headlines, Zara sat alone in her hotel room that evening, staring out at the city lights. For the first time since the incident, she let her guard down. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline wore off. She thought of the risk. Firing an entire crew on the spot was unprecedented. There would be investigations, meetings, perhaps even backlash. Some would say she overreacted, that she should have handled it differently. She knew the whispers that would come. Angry black woman, difficult, unprofessional. She had lived with those stereotypes her entire career. But then she remembered the little girl in the terminal asking her mother why the pilot was standing outside. She remembered the applause. She remembered the silver-haired woman's gratitude. And she knew, Even if the cost was high, the message was higher. Because silence, too, has a cost. And she had paid that cost too many times already. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Black pilot fires entire crew after discrimination incident. 7 minutes of waiting. Captain Sparks' industry debate. Courage at 30,000 feet. The story of Captain Zara Washington. News anchors debated on live television. Some praised her decisiveness, calling her a role model. Others criticized her, suggesting she let emotions interfere with leadership. But whether praise or critique, everyone was talking about her. And that, Zara realized, was part of the victory. Her story had forced the industry to confront a truth it often avoided. Discrimination was alive in its ranks. And for once, it could not be quietly swept aside. As she prepared for her next flight, a message came through her airline inbox. It was from a young cadet at the training academy. It read, "Captain Washington, I saw what you did. I'm a black student pilot, and sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Yesterday, you show me that not only do we belong, we lead. Thank you for reminding me to keep going." Zara read the message twice, then 3 times. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. If her decision had given just one person the strength to continue, then it had been worth every risk. But this was only the beginning. The airline could no longer ignore what had happened. Meetings were being scheduled, statements drafted, and unions preparing responses. The storm was just gathering. And Captain Zara Washington, calm, composed, and unyielding, was ready to fly straight through it. Because this was no longer just her story. It was the story of dignity reclaimed, of justice demanded, and of 7 minutes that changed everything. The boardroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint tapping of a pen against polished wood. A dozen executives sat around the long table, their faces tight with concern. At the head sat the CEO of Skyline Airways, his eyes fixed on the muted television mounted on the wall. The screen played the same clip on repeat. Captain Zara Washington, standing tall, her voice unwavering as she declared, "This is my flight, and this crew has just made the gravest mistake of their careers." The footage looped again, followed by the eruption of applause from passengers. Every replay was another blow to the company's image, and another spark for the public firestorm. The CEO finally broke the silence. "This is a crisis." An executive for public relations shifted nervously. "Sir, the video has over 20 million views across platforms. The hashtags are trending globally. Every major outlet is covering it. And the narrative is not in our favor." "Not in our favor," the CEO's voice sharpened. "It's catastrophic. Our airline is being branded as racist, discriminatory, and incompetent. Do you understand the scope of this?" Another executive, older, leaned forward. "We can't just focus on optics. The captain fired her crew without standard protocol. That sets a dangerous precedent. We need to discuss disciplinary action." The PR head interjected quickly. "With respect, disciplining her now would be suicide. The public sees her as a hero. They're calling her the face of justice in aviation. If we punish her, the backlash will double, triple. We'll be crucified." The room fractured into murmurs, arguments circling the table. Some demanded the captain be reprimanded to preserve order. Others argued the airline should issue a full apology, using the moment to announce diversity reforms. The CEO raised his hand, silencing the noise. His jaw tightened. "We cannot afford to look weak, but we also cannot afford to dismiss the public's outrage. We walk a knife's edge here." He turned to the operations chief. "What's her record?" The answer came swiftly. "Impeccable. Highest performance ratings. No incidents. Respected by passengers and peers. She's one of the most qualified captains we have." The CEO sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Of course she is." Meanwhile, Zara sat in a quiet cafe near the airport, sipping coffee as her phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. She had silenced most of them, but messages still slipped through. Friends congratulating her, strangers thanking her, reporters requesting interviews. Across from her sat her best friend, Lena, a fellow pilot who had known Zara since academy days. Lena watched her closely, You know this is only the beginning, right? Zara nodded. The airline's not going to let this slide. They'll want to make an example out of me. Or, Lena countered, they'll realize you just did what none of them had the courage to do. You expose a rot they've been pretending isn't there. Zara looked out the window, the city moving in a blur. I wasn't trying to expose anything. I was just tired. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of standing outside doors. I've already earned the right to walk through. Lena leaned forward. That's why it matters. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for everyone who's been told to wait outside. And now the whole world is watching. Zara's lips curved into the faintest smile. She wanted to believe that. But she also knew corporations did not bend easily. Power protected itself. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her airline inbox. Captain Washington, you are required to attend an emergency meeting with senior leadership tomorrow morning. Attendance is mandatory. The next day, Zara entered the towering glass headquarters of Skyline Airways. The building's polished marble floors and chrome accents reflected an image of power and wealth, but Zara walked through them with calm strides. She was not here as a defendant. She was here as a captain. In the boardroom, the executives waited. Their faces betrayed a mix of unease and calculation. Zara greeted them with professional courtesy, then took her seat at the long table. The CEO cleared his throat. Captain Washington, thank you for coming. We want to discuss the events of Flight 428. Zara folded her hands neatly. Of course. The operations chief spoke first. You relieved your crew of duty in a public space, without prior consultation or formal procedure. That action has no precedent in our airline's history. Zara met his eyes steadily. Neither does telling a captain to wait outside in front of passengers. A ripple moved through the room. The bluntness of her words left no room for polite evasion. The PR head jumped in, her tone smoother. Captain Washington, please understand, we're navigating intense public scrutiny. We need to strike the right balance between addressing the incident and maintaining order. Zara replied calmly. Order without justice is not order. It's oppression. What happened was not a misunderstanding. It was discrimination. And if this airline does not confront it directly, the public will not forgive you. Nor will I. Her words landed like weight on the table. Some executives shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at her with a mixture of respect and resentment. The CEO finally spoke. What would you have us do, Captain? Zara took a breath, her voice unwavering. Acknowledge what happened. Publicly. Apologize to the passengers who witnessed it. Implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. Create a reporting system that actually protects those who experience bias. And most importantly, ensure that no captain, no crew member, and no passenger ever again has to stand outside simply because of who they are. The room went still. The demands were bold, impossible to dismiss. The CEO's eyes narrowed. You've put us in a difficult position. Zara held his gaze. No, your crew did that when they dismissed me. I just refused to stay silent. The meeting adjourned without resolution, but Zara knew she had planted seeds that could not be uprooted. The executives would argue, spin, and strategize, but the truth had already escaped their control. Outside the headquarters, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Zara kept her posture steady, her answers measured. Captain Washington, do you regret your decision to fire your crew? No. Leadership is about protecting dignity as much as safety. I did both. What do you say to those who call you reckless? I say there is nothing reckless about demanding respect. Do you believe the airline will support you? I believe the truth is on my side, and the public has already spoken. Her responses spread across evening broadcasts, further fueling the fire. That night, social media ignited again. Civil rights leaders voiced support. Prominent figures in aviation, once silent, began sharing their own stories of bias and discrimination. Pilots of color from around the world sent messages of solidarity. But not all responses were kind. Hate messages flooded Zara's inbox, anonymous accounts spewing venom, calling her unfit, dangerous, and arrogant. She read a few, then closed the app. She had seen that kind of hate before. It no longer shocked her, but it reminded her of the stakes. Alone in her hotel room, Zara sat by the window, staring out at the night sky. Somewhere above, planes cut through the darkness, their lights blinking steadily. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Let them say what they want. I will not wait outside again." Meanwhile, in living rooms across the country, families replayed the viral clip, conversations spilling into late-night discussions. In classrooms, teachers used it as a case study in leadership. In training academies, cadets whispered about her with awe. 7 minutes had turned into a movement. And as Skyline Airways scrambled to contain the storm, Captain Zara Washington stood at the center, not as a victim of discrimination, but as a symbol of defiance, dignity, and unshakable pride. She had demanded justice. Now, she would see it through. Zara took a breath, her voice unwavering. Acknowledge what happened. Publicly. Apologize to the passengers who witnessed it. Implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all staff. Create a reporting system that actually protects those who experience bias. And most importantly, ensure that no captain, no crew member, and no passenger ever again has to stand outside simply because of who they are. The room went still. The demands were bold, impossible to dismiss. The CEO's eyes narrowed. "You've put us in a difficult position." Zara held his gaze. "No, your crew did that when they dismissed me. I just refused to stay silent." The meeting adjourned without resolution, but Zara knew she had planted seeds that could not be uprooted. The executives would argue, spin, and strategize, but the truth had already escaped their control. Outside the headquarters, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. Zara kept her posture steady, her answers measured. "Captain Washington, do you regret your decision to fire your crew?" "No. Leadership is about protecting dignity as much as safety. I did both." "What do you say to those who call you reckless?" "I say there is nothing reckless about demanding respect." "Do you believe the airline will support you?" "I believe the truth is on my side, and the public has already spoken." Her responses spread across evening broadcasts, further fueling the fire. That night, social media ignited again. Civil rights leaders voiced support. Prominent figures in aviation, once silent, began sharing their own stories of bias and discrimination. Pilots of color from around the world sent messages of solidarity. But not all responses were kind. Hate messages flooded Zara's inbox, anonymous accounts spewing venom, calling her unfit, dangerous, and arrogant. She read a few, then closed the app. She had seen that kind of hate before. It no longer shocked her, but it reminded her of the stakes. The sound began as a murmur, one voice, then a handful, then hundreds swelling into thousands. Outside Skyline Airways headquarters, the plaza was packed with protesters holding signs high against the glare of the sun. Justice for Zara. Respect black pilots. No more waiting outside. The chants echoed through downtown, spilling into streets, covered live by every major network. Camera drones hovered overhead, capturing the sea of voices that refused to be ignored. Zara watched from the hotel balcony across the street, her heart caught between pride and disbelief. She had not called for this. She had not organized rallies or printed signs. Yet people showed up, mothers with children, retired pilots, and students who had never boarded a plane but understood what it meant to be dismissed because of skin color. Her phone buzzed again. Lena's voice crackled through the line. "Are you seeing this? It's not just New York. They're marching in Atlanta, Chicago, and Houston. Even London and Johannesburg. Zara, this is global." Zara pressed her hand against the glass, staring at the waves of humanity below. All this for 7 minutes. "No," Lena corrected softly. "For centuries. You just lit the match." Inside the skyscraper across the street, the airline board convened again. Their voices rose in sharp tones, panic replacing composure. "This is unsustainable," barked one executive. "We're losing millions by the hour. Ticket cancellations, stock plunge, sponsors pulling back, and employees threatening walkouts," another added grimly. "Crew members are demanding diversity reforms." Pilots are threatening strikes in solidarity with Captain Washington. The CEO slammed his hand on the table. Enough. This circus ends now. We cannot let one employee dictate corporate policy. The PR head looked pale. Sir, she's not just an employee anymore. She's become a symbol. Every move we make against her looks like an attack on justice itself. The CEO leaned forward, voice like steel. Then we silence her before she destroys us. The room fell silent. No one asked how. They all knew what he meant. Later that evening, Zara received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost rehearsed. Captain Washington, I represent Skyline Airways. We'd like to offer you a settlement. A very generous sum, in exchange for your resignation and a non-disclosure agreement. You'll walk away wealthy, your record intact, and this unpleasant chapter will quietly fade. Zara's stomach tightened. She had expected pushback, but not so soon, not so blunt. And if I refuse? The voice hesitated only briefly. Then the company will be forced to protect itself. Your career could be at risk. Headlines can shift very quickly. Zara closed her eyes, gripping the phone. Images flashed in her mind. Her father's proud smile when she earned her wings, the children who waved at her in airports, and the young cadets who wrote letters saying she inspired them. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Tell your executives, I am not for sale. Justice cannot be signed away with a check. And she hung up. The next morning, the headlines exploded again. Leaked sources revealed that the airline had attempted to buy Captain Washington's silence. If Skyline Airways thought it could bury the story, it had just set it on fire. Protests doubled in size. Hashtags surged. Influential figures, athletes, artists, and political leaders joined the outcry. Airlines across the globe were forced to issue statements on diversity, scrambling to distance themselves from Skyline scandal. And in the middle of it all, Zara stood calm, her uniform pressed, her voice steady. She gave interviews not with anger, but with clarity. To the young girl who dreams of flying, know that the sky belongs to you. To the worker told to wait outside, your worth is not defined by their doorway. To Skyline Airways, this is no longer about one flight. This is about whether dignity has a seat on every plane. Her words were replayed on news tickers, quoted in newspapers, and painted onto protest banners. She had become more than a pilot. She was now a leader. But behind the strength, nights were heavy. Zara lay awake in her hotel bed, exhaustion pressing down. Every choice felt like a weight on her shoulders. What if the airline destroyed her career? What if passengers no longer trusted her to fly? One night, she whispered into the darkness, God, I didn't ask for this fight. But if this is mine to carry, give me the strength to finish it. The next morning, strength arrived in unexpected ways. At the hotel lobby, she was met by a group of pilots, men and women, black, Latino, Asian, even white, all wearing their uniforms. They greeted her not with words, but with salutes. One stepped forward, a veteran with silver hair. Captain Washington, we stand with you. Whatever they throw at you, they throw at us all. Emotions surged in Zara's chest, but she kept her composure. She returned the salute. Then we fly together. Back at headquarters, the board grew frantic. Boycotts were spreading internationally. Celebrities announced they would no longer fly Skyline. Lawsuits began piling in, passengers demanding refunds, employees claiming discrimination. The CEO sat alone in his office late at night, the weight of collapse pressing in. He replayed the viral video yet again, but now he didn't just see a captain firing her crew. He saw something larger, a truth he could no longer suppress. The airline had two choices: crush the captain and burn with the backlash, or admit fault and attempt redemption. For the first time, he felt fear, not of losing profit, but of being remembered in history as the man who tried to silence justice. Meanwhile, Zara prepared for what was next. She knew this wasn't over. The airline still held power, and power is rarely surrendered without a fight. But she also knew she wasn't standing alone anymore. When she boarded her next flight weeks later, not as a defendant, not as a rebel, but as a captain, passengers greeted her with applause. Strangers shook her hand. Children pointed at her uniform with awe. And as she took her seat in the cockpit, she whispered to herself with quiet resolve, "We're not waiting outside anymore." The courthouse was overflowing. Reporters filled the steps, cameras pointed at the grand marble entrance, while protesters lined the sidewalks, chanting the now familiar cry. No more waiting outside. Inside, the air was thick with tension. This was not just a lawsuit hearing. It was history. Skyline Airways, one of the largest carriers in the world, was being forced to answer for discrimination. And at the center sat Captain Zara Washington, poised and calm in her Navy uniform, the silver wings on her chest gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, called the room to order. Lawyers for Skyline Airways laid out their arguments, procedures, protocols, technicalities. They painted Zara as reckless, insubordinate, and unprofessional. But then Zara's lawyer stood, voice firm and clear. "Your Honor, the defense has presented rules. We will present reality. The reality is that a black woman, fully qualified, wearing the stripes of captain, was told to wait outside her own flight. The reality is that when she stood against humiliation, she was threatened with silence. The reality is that her courage has inspired a global call for justice. This is not insubordination. This is leadership." The courtroom buzzed. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on Zara. One by one, witnesses testified. Passengers from that fateful flight describing the scene, crew members admitting under oath that bias had influenced their actions, and industry experts detailing years of systemic discrimination. By the time Zara herself took the stand, the room was silent. She spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "I didn't fire my crew to make history. I didn't fire them to make headlines. I did it because leadership means protecting every soul on board, not just their safety, but their dignity. If I had stayed silent, if I had waited outside, I would have betrayed everything this uniform stands for. I love flying. I love this airline. But I will never love injustice. Not on my watch." Her words struck like thunder. Some in the gallery wiped tears. Others clapped before the judge sternly called for order. Weeks later, the verdict arrived. Skyline Airways was ordered to pay a massive settlement to passengers, implement mandatory anti-discrimination reforms, and publicly apologize to Captain Washington. More importantly, the judgment included a groundbreaking clause, a permanent oversight committee led by independent experts to ensure diversity and equity across all airline operations. The news swept the world. For the first time in history, an airline had been legally forced to change, not because of federal pressure, not because of internal reform, but because one captain refused to wait outside. The press conference that followed was unlike any other. The CEO of Skyline Airways, looking far older than weeks before, stepped up to the podium. He cleared his throat, the weight of defeat heavy in his voice. "On behalf of Skyline Airways, we extend our deepest apologies to Captain Washington, to our passengers, and to the public. What happened was unacceptable. We failed to uphold the values we claim to stand for. Today, we commit to change." The cameras flashed. The world listened. But the moment that followed overshadowed his words. Because Zara herself walked onto the stage, not as a victim being acknowledged, but as a leader claiming her place. She adjusted the microphone, her presence commanding yet calm. "This isn't about Skyline Airways alone. This is about every company, every institution, and every individual who thinks dignity can be denied and justice delayed. We are here to say no more. From this day forward, no pilot, no worker, no child with a dream will be told to wait outside." The crowd erupted. Hashtags exploded across screens. And for the first time, the chant wasn't just from protesters. It came from the press, from workers, and from strangers watching online. No more waiting outside. Months later, Zara returned to the cockpit. The familiar hum of the engines vibrated beneath her hands, the runway stretching like a promise ahead. Her new crew sat ready, diverse, respectful, united. As the passengers boarded, many paused at the door, smiling in recognition. Some whispered, "Thank you." Others simply nodded, eyes shining. When Zara took the intercom, her voice filled the cabin with steady warmth. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Zara Washington. Welcome aboard. Today's flight is more than a journey from one city to another. It is a reminder that every seat, every soul, and every story matters. Thank you for trusting us with yours. The cabin broke into applause before she even pushed the throttle forward. Years later, her name would be written in textbooks. Aviation academies would teach the Washington case as a landmark moment in corporate accountability. Young cadets, especially women of color, would wear their uniforms with pride, whispering her name like a beacon, Captain Zara. But for Zara herself, legacy was never the goal. One evening, as she walked through an airport terminal, a little black girl ran up to her, clutching a toy airplane. "Are you the captain from a video?" the girl asked, eyes wide with wonder. Zara knelt down, smiling gently. "Yes, I'm Captain Washington." The girl's face lit up. "I want to be like you." Zara placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't be like me. Be greater. The sky is waiting for you." And in that moment, Zara knew the fight had been worth it. Not for the headlines, not for the lawsuits, but for the child who would never again be told to wait outside.